The crystal chandeliers of the Grand Meridian Hotel cast dancing shadows across the marble floor as chaos erupted in what was supposed to be Manhattan's most exclusive wedding venue. Victoria Sterling, the city's most sought-after wedding planner, stood in the center of the opulent ballroom, with her phone pressed to her ear, her usually perfect composure cracking like fine porcelain. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I don't care if your entire staff has food poisoning, she hissed into the device, her voice echoing through the cavernous space filled with 500 chairs draped in ivory silk. The Blackwood Montgomery wedding is in 4 hours, and I have 300 guests expecting a 7-course meal prepared by your restaurant. She ended the call with a sharp tap and immediately dialed another number, her manicured fingers trembling slightly. Around her, a small army of florists, musicians, and decorators continued their work, oblivious to the catastrophe unfolding. White roses and peonies cascaded from towering arrangements, their sweet fragrance mixing with the scent of expensive perfume and mounting panic. "Mrs. Blackwood," Victoria said when the call connected, her voice artificially bright. "There's been a small complication with the catering. Nothing we can't handle, but I wanted to keep you informed." The response from the other end was immediate and volcanic. Even from across the room, the wedding photographer could hear the shouting through the phone. Victoria held the device away from her ear, wincing as the tirade continued. Margaret Blackwood, mother of the bride and Manhattan's most feared socialite, was not known for her patience or understanding. "Yes, I understand this is your daughter's only wedding day," Victoria said when the screaming finally subsided. "I'm exploring every option. I'll call you back within the hour with a solution." She hung up and immediately buried her face in her hands. 23 years in the wedding planning business, and she had never faced a disaster of this magnitude. The Blackwood-Montgomery Union wasn't just any wedding. It was the social event of the decade, with guests including senators, tech moguls, Hollywood A-listers, and European nobility. The bride, Sophia Blackwood, was the only daughter of real estate tycoon Richard Blackwood, whose net worth exceeded $2 billion. The groom, Alexander Montgomery, came from old Philadelphia money and owned a chain of luxury hotels across the East Coast. Their engagement had been featured on the cover of Vanity Fair. The wedding preparations had been documented by Vogue. The guest list read like a who's who of American high society. And now, 4 hours before the ceremony, Victoria had no food, no backup caterer available on such short notice, and a bride's family that could destroy her career with a single bad review. "Miss Sterling?" A tentative voice interrupted her spiral of panic. Victoria looked up to see Marcus Chen, the hotel's events coordinator, approaching with obvious reluctance. His usually immaculate appearance was disheveled, his tie askew, and there were visible sweat stains on his shirt collar, despite the ballroom's air conditioning. "Please tell me you have good news, Marcus," she said, though his expression suggested otherwise. He shook his head grimly. "I've called every high-end caterer in a 50-mile radius. The ones who aren't already booked are either too small to handle this volume or can't guarantee the quality standard we need. The closest I found was a corporate catering company that does business lunches, but they said their fanciest option is chicken cordon bleu for 200 people maximum." Victoria felt her stomach drop. Chicken cordon bleu at a Blackwood wedding would be like serving gas station coffee at the Ritz-Carlton. "What about the hotel's restaurant? Can't they prepare something?" "Their kitchen is designed for intimate dining. Maybe 60 covers maximum. We'd need at least 4 times that capacity. Plus, the presentation standards, the dietary restrictions, the wine pairings." Marcus trailed off, seeing the hopelessness in Victoria's eyes. The wedding planner sank into one of the silk-draped chairs, her perfectly styled blonde hair coming loose from its chignon. In 4 hours, 300 of the most influential people in America would arrive expecting perfection. The bride and groom were currently at the Plaza Hotel, blissfully unaware that their dream wedding was turning into a nightmare. The photographer had already set up his equipment. The string quartet was tuning their instruments. The flowers were arranged, the cake was decorated, and the champagne was chilling. Everything was ready except the most essential element, the feast that would celebrate the union of 2 of America's most prominent families. "There's something else," Marcus said reluctantly. Victoria looked up, wondering how the situation could possibly get worse. "The backup generator for the sound system is malfunctioning. If it fails during the ceremony, we'll lose all audio. The acoustics in this room require amplification for the guest in the back to hear the vows." She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. 23 years of building her reputation, and it could all crumble in a single afternoon. The Blackwood family had connections throughout Manhattan's elite circles. One disastrous wedding could mean the end of Sterling events forever. Miss Sterling? Another voice, this one with a slight accent she couldn't immediately place. Victoria opened her eyes to see a young woman standing a respectful distance away. She was perhaps 28 years old, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and wearing the simple gray uniform of the hotel's housekeeping staff. Her name tag read Isabella Rodriguez, and she held a clipboard and a set of cleaning supplies. "I'm sorry to interrupt," Isabella continued, her voice soft but clear. "I couldn't help but overhear about the catering situation." Marcus stepped forward protectively. "Isabella, this isn't the time. We need to finish preparing the ballroom." But Victoria was looking at the young woman with newfound interest. There was something in Isabella's expression, a quiet confidence that seemed out of place for someone whose job was cleaning hotel rooms. "What about the catering situation?" Victoria asked. Isabella glanced between Victoria and Marcus, then took a small step forward. "I know this might sound presumptuous, but I think I might be able to help." Marcus laughed, though there was no humor in it. "Isabella, we need a 7-course gourmet meal for 300 people. I don't think your grandmother's recipes are going to solve this problem." Instead of being offended, Isabella smiled slightly. "Actually, my grandmother's recipes might be exactly what you need, but that's not what I was going to suggest." She turned to Victoria, who was now giving her full attention. There was something about this young woman that commanded respect, despite her humble uniform and position. "I graduated from the Culinary Institute of America 3 years ago," Isabella said matter-of-factly. "I specialized in large-scale event catering and classical French cuisine. I worked under Chef Philippe Dubois at Le Bernardin for 18 months before I came here." The name hit Victoria like a thunderbolt. Le Bernardin was one of the most prestigious restaurants in New York, holding 3 Michelin stars and a reputation for culinary perfection. Chef Philippe Dubois was a legend in the industry, known for his impossibly high standards and his ability to create magic with simple ingredients. "You worked at Le Bernardin?" Victoria asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sous chef," Isabella confirmed. "I left to take care of my mother when she became ill. The housekeeping position here was temporary, just until I could get back on my feet financially. But I still have all my connections in the industry, and, more importantly, I know how to execute a menu like this." Marcus stared at her in disbelief. "Isabella, you've been cleaning our rooms for 6 months. You never mentioned any of this." "You never asked," she replied simply. "And I needed the job, but right now Miss Sterling needs a solution, and I can provide one." Victoria felt the first spark of hope she'd experienced in the last hour. Even if you have the expertise, we're talking about 300 people. The volume alone. "I have contacts throughout the city," Isabella interrupted gently. "Chefs who owe me favors, suppliers who trust me, staff who would work a Saturday for the right price. The Grand Meridian has a world-class kitchen facility in the basement that hasn't been used since they stopped hosting large corporate events 5 years ago. It's fully equipped, just needs to be cleaned and fired up." She paused, then added, "I also know that Mrs. Blackwood specifically requested a menu inspired by classical European cuisine with modern American touches. I heard her discussing it with you last week when I was cleaning the conference room where you met." Victoria's eyes widened. She remembered that meeting, remembered discussing the bride's preferences for dishes that would honor both her family's American roots and the groom's European sensibilities. She had never noticed the cleaning woman in the corner, quietly going about her work. "You were listening to our planning meetings?" Marcus asked, though his tone was more curious than accusatory. "I was doing my job," Isabella replied. "But I have a good memory, and I care about the details. I know Mrs. Blackwood wants the appetizer course to include both American classics and French delicacies. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. I know she's concerned about her uncle's shellfish allergy and her grandmother's vegetarian requirements. I know she wants the wine pairings to tell a story about the couple's travels together. Victoria stood up slowly, her mind racing. This was either the solution to her prayers or the most elaborate hoax she'd ever encountered. Isabella, what you're suggesting is incredible, but the risk. The risk is that you'll have the wedding of the century instead of the disaster of the decade, Isabella said with quiet conviction. I can make this happen, Miss Sterling, but I'll need your trust, and I'll need to start immediately. Before Victoria could respond, her phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced down and felt her heart sink even further. It was from Margaret Blackwood. Victoria, I expect an update in 30 minutes. The Times photographer will be documenting this wedding for their Sunday Society section. Failure is not an option. She looked back at Isabella, this mysterious young woman who had just offered to save her career and reputation. There was something in the housekeeper's eyes, a depth of knowledge and experience that seemed far beyond her years or current position. If I say yes, Victoria said carefully, what would you need? Isabella's expression became businesslike, and Victoria caught a glimpse of the professional chef beneath the housekeeping uniform. First, I need access to the basement kitchen and a team to clean and prep it. Second, I need your authorization to make calls to my contacts in the industry. Third, I need a budget for ingredients and additional staff. The budget isn't a problem, Victoria said immediately. The Blackwood family had allocated an extraordinary sum for this wedding, and they would pay anything to avoid embarrassment. But the timeline? 4 hours is tight, but it's doable for someone who knows what they're doing, Isabella said. I've executed dinner services for larger groups in less time. The key is organization, delegation, and having a clear vision. She pulled a small notebook from her pocket and flipped it open. Victoria could see pages of neat handwriting, recipes, and what looked like detailed planning notes. I've actually been thinking about this menu since I overheard your conversation last week, Isabella admitted. I know that sounds presumptuous, but I couldn't help myself. It's a beautiful vision, and I started imagining how I would execute it. She showed Victoria a page filled with neat columns listing dishes, ingredients, preparation times, and staffing requirements. It was the work of a true professional, someone who understood both the creative and logistical aspects of high-end catering. Victoria felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. After an hour of despair, this young woman was offering not just a solution, but a well-thought-out plan. There's one more thing, Isabella said, her voice becoming slightly hesitant. If we do this, if I take on this responsibility, I need to ask for something in return. Victoria's heart sank. Of course there would be conditions. Nothing in life was free, especially not miracles. What do you need? She asked. After today, I need a recommendation, Isabella said. Not for another housekeeping position, but for a real job in the culinary industry. I've been trying to get back into professional kitchens for 6 months, but my resume gap is making it difficult. If I can pull this off, if I can make this wedding everything the Blackwood family dreams of, I need your help to get my career back on track. Victoria stared at her, realizing she was looking at someone whose story was far more complex than she had imagined. Here was a trained chef, clearly talented and knowledgeable, working as a housekeeper not by choice but by necessity. Whatever had brought her to this point, she was asking for a chance to prove herself on the biggest stage possible. If you can save this wedding, Victoria said slowly, I will personally ensure that every major event planner and caterer in Manhattan knows your name. But Isabella, you have to understand the stakes here. If this goes wrong, it won't just be my career that's ruined. The Blackwood family won't have anything to complain about. Isabella finished firmly. I know what I'm doing, Miss Sterling. I learned from the best. And I've never forgotten the lessons. Give me this chance, and I'll give you a wedding that people will talk about for years. Victoria looked around the ballroom, taking in the flowers, the decorations, the perfect setting that was missing only the most crucial element. Then she looked back at Isabella, this unexpected savior who had appeared just when hope seemed lost. Marcus, she said, turning to the events coordinator. "Take Isabella downstairs and show her the kitchen. Give her whatever she needs." "Miss Sterling, are you sure about this?" Marcus asked. "I mean, Isabella is wonderful at her job, but this is our only option," Victoria said decisively. "And frankly, it's starting to sound like our best option." She turned back to Isabella, extending her hand. "Save my wedding, and I'll save your career. Deal?" Isabella shook her hand, and Victoria was struck by the firmness of her grip, the calluses that spoke of years working with knives and hot pans, the confidence of someone who had found her element. "Deal," Isabella said. "Now, let's go cook the wedding of the century." As Victoria and Marcus followed Isabella toward the service elevator that would take them to the basement kitchen, Victoria's phone began ringing again. She glanced at the screen and saw Margaret Blackwood's name, but for the first time in hours, she didn't feel the familiar surge of panic. "Mrs. Blackwood," she answered, her voice steady and professional. "I have wonderful news about the catering situation." The basement level of the Grand Meridian Hotel was a maze of service corridors and storage rooms that most guests never knew existed. The air was cooler here, filled with the institutional smell of industrial cleaning products and the faint hum of ventilation systems. Isabella led the way with the confidence of someone who had spent months learning every corner of the building. "I've been down here before," she explained as they walked. "During my breaks, I like to explore. I found the old kitchen about 2 months ago and realized what a waste it was to have all that equipment sitting unused." She pushed through a set of heavy double doors, and Victoria gasped. The kitchen was massive, easily 3 times the size of most restaurant kitchens she'd seen. Stainless steel prep tables stretched across the center of the room, surrounded by industrial-grade ovens, multiple stovetops, walk-in coolers, and every piece of equipment a professional chef could dream of. "This is incredible," Victoria breathed. "Why isn't the hotel using this space?" "Budget cuts 5 years ago," Marcus explained. "They decided it was more cost-effective to outsource large events rather than maintain their own catering operation. But they never got rid of the equipment." Isabella was already moving through the space, checking ovens, testing burners, and examining the condition of the equipment. Her housekeeping uniform seemed incongruous in this professional kitchen environment, but her movements were those of someone completely at home. "Everything looks functional," she said, opening the door to one of the walk-in coolers. "We'll need to do a thorough cleaning, but the bones are good. Marcus, I'm going to need about 6 people to help me prep this space. Can you pull them from housekeeping?" "I'll make it happen," he replied, already reaching for his radio. Isabella pulled out her phone and began scrolling through her contacts. "Miss Sterling, I'm going to start making calls. I need you to authorize whatever expenses I incur. We're going to be moving fast and I won't have time to check every purchase." Victoria nodded. "Whatever you need. Money is not an issue." The first call Isabella made was to someone named Diego. She spoke rapidly in Spanish, explaining the situation, the timeline, and what she needed. Victoria couldn't follow the conversation completely, but she caught enough words to understand that Diego was agreeing to help, and that he was bringing others. The second call was to a supplier, someone who apparently knew Isabella well enough to trust her completely. Within minutes, she had arranged for the delivery of premium ingredients, from Maine lobster to Wagyu beef, all to arrive within the next hour. The third call was to a woman named Sarah, who Isabella explained was a pastry chef she'd worked with previously. Sarah would handle the dessert course and coordinate with the cake that had already been prepared. With each call, Victoria watched this remarkable transformation taking place before her eyes. The quiet, almost invisible housekeeper was revealing herself to be a consummate professional, with a network of contacts throughout Manhattan's culinary world. The confidence in her voice, the speed with which she organized complex logistics, the way she spoke about flavor profiles and presentation. It was like watching an actress shed her costume to reveal her true identity. "One more call," Isabella said, dialing a number she apparently knew by heart. "Chef Philippe," she said when the call connected. "It's Isabella Rodriguez. I need a favor." Even from across the kitchen, Victoria could hear the warm, heavily accented voice on the other end of the line. The conversation was brief, conducted partially in French, but when Isabella hung up, she was smiling. "What was that about?" Victoria asked. "Insurance," Isabella replied. "If anything goes wrong, if I need guidance or additional hands. Chef Philippe is sending 2 of his best line cooks to assist. They'll be here within an hour. Victoria felt another wave of relief wash over her. The fact that a 3-Michelin-star chef was willing to send his own staff to help spoke volumes about Isabella's abilities and reputation. Marcus returned with a team of 6 housekeeping staff members, all looking confused but willing to help. Isabella immediately began organizing them, assigning tasks with the efficiency of a seasoned kitchen manager. 2 people would focus on deep cleaning the prep surfaces, 2 would handle the ovens and stovetops, and 2 would organize the walk-in coolers and freezers. I need this space spotless within an hour, she told them. We're going to be preparing food for 300 very important people, and everything has to be perfect. As the cleaning crew got to work, Isabella turned to Victoria with a notepad in her hand. I need to confirm some details about the menu, she said. Mrs. Blackwood mentioned wanting a story told through the food. What did she mean by that? Victoria consulted her own notes. She wants each course to represent a chapter in Sophia and Alexander's relationship. They met in Paris, so the first course should have French influences. Their first vacation together was in Italy, so the pasta course should reflect that. They got engaged in Napa Valley, so the wine selection should feature California vintages alongside traditional French bottles. Isabella nodded thoughtfully. That's beautiful. And very doable. What about dietary restrictions? Uncle Robert has a severe shellfish allergy. Grandmother Eleanor is vegetarian but will eat fish. Senator Williams is diabetic. And Mrs. Blackwood herself is gluten-sensitive but not celiac. Got it, Isabella said, making notes. I can accommodate all of that without compromising the overall vision. She began sketching out a revised menu, explaining each dish as she wrote. The appetizer course would feature both classic French canapés and American comfort foods elevated to fine dining standards. The soup course would be a delicate bouillabaisse made without shellfish but with the same complex flavors, accompanied by a vegetarian alternative. The pasta course would showcase handmade Italian techniques with ingredients sourced from local artisans. For the main course, Isabella continued, I want to do a choice of 3 proteins. Wagyu beef with a red wine reduction for the traditionalists, wild salmon with a champagne beurre blanc for those preferring fish, and a vegetarian option that's so spectacular no one will feel like they're compromising. Victoria found herself getting excited as she listened. This wasn't just problem-solving. This was artistry. Isabella wasn't simply replacing the failed caterer. She was elevating the entire concept. The cheese course will be small but perfect, Isabella went on. I have a connection who can get us selections from the best fromage in the city. And for dessert, in addition to the wedding cake, I want to create a small tasting plate that represents the couple's travels, French macarons, Italian cannoli, American chocolate truffles, all made fresh this afternoon. Isabella, Victoria said quietly, this sounds incredible, but can you really execute all of this in 3 hours? Isabella looked up from her notes, and Victoria saw a spark in her eyes that spoke of passion, skill, and years of experience in high-pressure situations. Miss Sterling, I've worked dinner service at Le Bernardin during restaurant week. I've catered private dinners for celebrities with impossible demands and no notice. I've cooked for food critics who could destroy a career with a single bad review. This is challenging, but it's not impossible. Not if everyone does their job. The first delivery truck arrived just as the cleaning crew was finishing their work. Isabella supervised the unloading personally, checking each ingredient against her list, examining the quality of everything from the microgreens to the prime beef. Victoria watched her reject 2 cases of vegetables that didn't meet her standards and approve upgrades on several items that exceeded her expectations. Diego arrived next, bringing with him 4 other professional cooks who clearly respected Isabella's leadership. They moved through the kitchen with practiced efficiency, setting up stations, organizing equipment, and beginning the complex prep work that would need to be completed before service could begin. Okay, everyone listen up, Isabella called out, and the kitchen fell silent. We have 2 hours and 45 minutes to prepare a 7-course tasting menu for 300 guests. This is not impossible, but it requires perfect execution from everyone in this room. She had changed out of her housekeeping uniform and into proper chef's whites that Diego had brought for her. With her hair tucked under a chef's toque and her sleeves rolled up, she looked every inch the professional she clearly was. "We're going to work in teams," she continued. "Diego, you're handling the protein stations. Maria, you've got vegetables and garnishes. Carlos, you're my pasta specialist. Everyone else, you follow their lead and mine. We communicate clearly, we work cleanly, and we remember that this isn't just about food. It's about creating memories for people on one of the most important days of their lives." The kitchen exploded into organized activity. Victoria watched from a corner, staying out of the way but fascinated by the choreography unfolding before her. Isabella moved from station to station, tasting, adjusting, guiding, and leading with an authority that belied her months as a housekeeper. The transformation was remarkable. Sauces that had seemed impossible to execute in the timeline came together under Isabella's expert guidance. Delicate appetizers were assembled with the precision of a Swiss watch. The pasta was rolled and cut by hand, each piece perfect. The aroma filling the kitchen was heavenly, promising a meal that would exceed even the highest expectations. "Miss Sterling!" Marcus appeared at her elbow, looking concerned. "The bride and groom just arrived for photos. They're asking about the menu tasting." Victoria's heart skipped a beat. In all the chaos, she had forgotten that Sophia and Alexander traditionally did a final tasting of each course before the wedding began. It was another potential disaster. How could they explain the complete change in catering? "Isabella," she called out, "we have a situation." The chef looked up from a sauce she was stirring, listened to the explanation, and nodded calmly. "Bring them down," she said. "Let them taste what we're creating. If they don't love it, we'll adjust, but I think they're going to be very happy." Victoria hesitated. This was another enormous risk. If the bride and groom rejected the new menu, there would be no time to make changes. But looking around the kitchen, seeing the skill and passion being poured into every dish, she found herself believing in Isabella's vision. "Marcus, bring them down in 15 minutes, she said. "Tell them we have some special surprises we want them to taste." As the events coordinator left, Isabella began plating small portions of the first 3 courses. Her plating was exquisite, each dish a work of art that would photograph beautifully. Victoria could hardly believe that this was the same woman who had been quietly cleaning hotel rooms just hours earlier. The sound of footsteps on the stairs announced the arrival of the bride and groom. Sophia Blackwood was every inch the Manhattan princess, her dark hair styled in loose waves, her makeup flawless even hours before the ceremony. She wore a designer dress that probably cost more than most people's cars, and her engagement ring caught the kitchen lights like a small star. Alexander Montgomery was tall, distinguished, with the kind of understated elegance that came from generations of good breeding and expensive education. They both looked slightly puzzled to find themselves in a basement kitchen, instead of the elegant tasting room where they had originally sampled their menu. "Miss Sterling," Sophia said, her voice carrying the slight edge of someone accustomed to having her questions answered immediately. "What exactly is going on?" Marcus mentioned something about surprises, but this seems rather unusual. Victoria took a deep breath. "Sophia, Alexander, I want you to meet Isabella Rodriguez, the chef who is going to make your wedding dinner absolutely unforgettable." Isabella stepped forward, and Victoria saw her transform once again. Gone was any trace of the deferential housekeeper. This was a confident culinary artist, comfortable in her expertise and proud of her work. "Mr. and Mrs. Montgomery to be," she said with a warm smile. "I know this must seem strange, but I wanted you to taste what we've prepared for you before I explain how we got here." She guided them to a small table that had been set up in the corner of the kitchen, complete with proper linens and crystal glasses. The first course was already plated. Delicate, French-inspired canapés, alongside elevated American classics, each one a perfect bite-sized work of art. Sophia picked up a small toast point, topped with what looked like caviar and creme fraiche. She bit into it hesitantly, her expression immediately changing to one of surprise and delight. "This is extraordinary," she said, looking at Alexander. "Try the one with the smoked salmon." Alexander tasted several of the offerings, his expression growing more impressed with each bite. "Isabella, this is remarkable. The flavors are so clean and balanced. Where did you train?" "The Culinary Institute of America, and then Le Bernardin under Chef Philippe," Isabella replied simply. Sophia nearly choked on her wine. Le Bernardin, you worked at Le Bernardin? For 18 months as sous chef, Isabella confirmed. Before life circumstances brought me to the Grand Meridian. She presented the second course, a reimagined bouillabaisse that captured all the complexity of the traditional dish while accommodating the dietary restrictions Victoria had mentioned. The broth was rich and aromatic, filled with perfectly cooked fish and vegetables that had been elevated far beyond their humble origins. I've never tasted anything like this, Alexander said, savoring the soup. It's familiar but completely new at the same time. The third course was the handmade pasta, delicate ribbons tossed with a sauce that somehow managed to be both light and intensely flavorful. Sophia closed her eyes as she tasted it, a blissful expression crossing her face. Isabella, she said when she opened her eyes, I don't understand. How did you end up preparing our wedding dinner? What happened to Laurent's restaurant? Isabella glanced at Victoria, who nodded encouragingly. Your original caterer had an emergency, Isabella explained tactfully. Miss Sterling was faced with an impossible situation, and I offered to help. I know this isn't what you planned, but I promise you that what we're creating will be everything you dreamed of and more. Sophia looked at Alexander, then back at Isabella. Can you tell us about the rest of the menu? Isabella's eyes lit up as she described each upcoming course, explaining how she had woven the story of their relationship through the food, how each dish connected to their shared experiences and travels. She spoke about the wine pairings, the presentation, the way each course would build on the last to create a complete culinary narrative. This is incredible, Sophia said when Isabella finished. Alexander, this is better than what we originally planned. The personal touches, the story element, it's exactly what I wanted, but didn't know how to ask for. Alexander nodded, reaching for his fiancée's hand. Isabella, I don't know how you've managed to create something this special on such short notice, but we're grateful. More than grateful, we're amazed. Victoria felt tears of relief threaten to spill over. Not only had disaster been averted, but it was being transformed into something magical. There's just one thing, Sophia said, and Victoria's heart stopped. I want our guests to know about you. I want them to understand that they're experiencing something extraordinary, created by someone extraordinary. Would you be willing to address the guests before the meal is served? Isabella looked surprised. Mrs. Montgomery, I'm just the chef. This is your day. No, Sophia said firmly. You're not just anything. You're an artist who saved our wedding and turned it into something beyond our wildest dreams. I want you to be celebrated for that. As the bride and groom headed back upstairs to continue their preparations, Victoria found herself alone with Isabella in the bustling kitchen. The impossible had happened. Not only had they solved the catering crisis, but they had created something better than anyone had dared to hope for. Isabella, Victoria said quietly, I don't know how to thank you for this. You don't need to thank me, Isabella replied, returning to her station where she was overseeing the preparation of the main courses. You gave me a chance when no one else would. You trusted me when you had every reason not to. She paused in her work, looking directly at Victoria. Do you know what it's like to have all the training, all the passion, all the skill in the world, and have no one willing to see past your current circumstances to recognize what you're capable of? Victoria thought about it, realizing that in her own privileged position, she had never faced such a challenge. I can imagine it must be frustrating. It's heartbreaking, Isabella said simply. I spent 6 months applying for chef positions only to be told I was overqualified for line cook jobs and underqualified for leadership roles because of my employment gap. No one wanted to hear about why I took the housekeeping job or what I was capable of accomplishing. She returned to stirring a sauce that smelled like heaven. Today you saw me as a person with potential instead of just a uniform with a function. That means more to me than you can possibly know. Victoria watched this remarkable woman work, understanding now that she hadn't just hired a chef. She had discovered a hidden treasure that had been right under everyone's noses for months. Isabella's story was a reminder that talent and worth weren't always visible on the surface, and that sometimes the most extraordinary people were hiding in the most ordinary places. The next hour passed in a blur of intense activity. The kitchen had become a symphony of coordinated movement, with each team member playing their part in creating what was shaping up to be a truly memorable meal. Isabella moved through it all like a conductor, tasting, adjusting, encouraging, and ensuring that every detail met her exacting standards. As the time for service approached, Victoria made her way back upstairs to oversee the final preparations in the ballroom. The guests were beginning to arrive, Manhattan's elite filing into the opulent space in their designer gowns and custom tuxedos. The photographer was capturing every moment, and Victoria could see that this was indeed going to be the social event of the decade. Margaret Blackwood approached her, resplendent in a purple Vera Wang gown that probably cost more than most people's annual salaries. "Victoria, darling," she said, air-kissing both cheeks. "Everything looks absolutely perfect. I must admit, I was worried when you mentioned the catering situation, but you assured me it was handled." "It's more than handled, Mrs. Blackwood," Victoria replied with genuine confidence. "Your daughter is going to have the wedding dinner of her dreams." As if summoned by her words, the first course began to appear from the service elevators. The waitstaff, briefed by Isabella on the story behind each dish, moved through the room with professional grace. Victoria watched as the guests took their first bites, saw their expressions change from polite expectation to genuine amazement. She could hear fragments of conversation as she moved through the crowd. "Extraordinary flavor combinations. I've never tasted anything quite like this. Who is this chef? We must have them cater our next event." From her position near the head table, Victoria could see Sophia and Alexander beaming as they watched their guests' reactions. This wasn't just a successful recovery from a potential disaster. This was a triumph that would be talked about for years to come. But the real vindication came when Senator Williams, known throughout Manhattan as one of the city's most discerning food critics in his spare time, approached her during the third course. "Victoria," he said, "I must know who your chef is. This is restaurant-quality cuisine, but it's more than that. There's a story being told here, a level of artistry that goes beyond mere technical skill." Before Victoria could respond, Sophia stood up at the head table, tapping her champagne glass with a fork. The ballroom gradually fell silent as 300 guests turned their attention to the bride. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sophia began, her voice carrying clearly through the sound system that had been successfully repaired, "I want to share something with you about tonight's dinner. 6 hours ago, we faced what seemed like an insurmountable crisis. Our catering had fallen through, and it looked like our wedding reception might be ruined. But then something extraordinary happened. Someone stepped forward who transformed what could have been a disaster into the most incredible culinary experience of our lives." She gestured toward the service entrance, where Isabella had just emerged to check on the progression of courses. "I want you all to meet Isabella Rodriguez, the chef who created tonight's masterpiece. Isabella, please come forward." Isabella froze in the doorway, clearly unprepared for this level of public attention. She was still wearing her chef's whites, her face flushed from the heat of the kitchen, strands of hair escaping from under her toque. For a moment, she looked like she might retreat back to the safety of her kitchen. But Sophia continued, her voice warm with genuine gratitude. "Isabella didn't just save our wedding. She elevated it beyond anything we could have imagined. Every dish tonight tells the story of Alexander's and my journey together, crafted by someone who took the time to understand not just what we wanted to eat, but what we wanted to feel." The applause started slowly, but built as guests began to understand the magnitude of what they were witnessing. This wasn't just appreciation for a good meal. This was recognition of artistry under pressure, of someone who had turned crisis into triumph. Isabella walked slowly toward the front of the room, her composure gradually returning as she moved. When she reached the microphone that Sophia offered her, she paused for a moment, looking out at the sea of elegant faces. "Thank you," she said simply, her voice steady despite the circumstances. 6 months ago, I was working in one of New York's finest restaurants, but life took an unexpected turn. I found myself starting over, taking any job I could find to support my family. What I discovered during that time was that passion for your craft doesn't disappear just because your circumstances change." She glanced toward Victoria, who was standing near the back of the room with tears in her eyes. Today, Miss Sterling took a chance on someone she barely knew, based on nothing more than a promise and a dream. She reminded me that sometimes the most important ingredient in any recipe is trust. The applause was thunderous now, and Isabella smiled as she handed the microphone back to Sophia. As she made her way back toward the kitchen, she was stopped repeatedly by guests wanting to know more about her background, her training, her availability for future events. Victoria watched from across the room as Manhattan's social elite discovered what she had learned just hours earlier, that Isabella Rodriguez was far more than she appeared to be. Business cards were exchanged, phone numbers were given, and Victoria could see the beginnings of what would undoubtedly become a very successful catering career. The fourth course emerged from the kitchen as Isabella returned to her duties, and if anything, the quality continued to exceed expectations. The main course selection was a masterpiece of execution, each protein cooked to perfection, each sauce balanced and complex, each plate a work of art that photographed beautifully. Victoria found herself relaxing for the first time all day as she watched the service progress flawlessly. The waitstaff moved with precision, the timing between courses was perfect, and the guests were clearly having an extraordinary experience. This wasn't just a successful wedding. It was the kind of event that would be remembered and talked about for years. Margaret Blackwood appeared at her elbow during the cheese course, her expression one of amazement and delight. "Victoria, I must confess I was skeptical when you mentioned the last-minute change, but this has been absolutely spectacular. How did you manage to find such an incredible chef on such short notice?" "Sometimes the best solutions are hiding in plain sight," Victoria replied, thinking about Isabella quietly cleaning rooms while possessing world-class culinary skills. "The challenge is recognizing talent when it doesn't come in the package you expect." The dessert course was the final revelation. In addition to the elaborate wedding cake that had been ordered months in advance, Isabella had created individual dessert plates that were works of art. Each guest received a small selection of sweets, representing different countries and cultures, beautifully presented and perfectly executed. Victoria watched Senator Williams take a bite of what appeared to be a deconstructed tiramisu and close his eyes in appreciation. At the next table, a prominent food blogger was discreetly taking photos of her plate while making notes on her phone. The young socialite wife of a tech mogul was asking her waiter for the chef's contact information. As the evening progressed and the dancing began, Victoria found herself back in the kitchen, where Isabella and her team were beginning the massive cleanup operation. The contrast between the elegant ballroom and the industrial kitchen was stark, but both spaces buzzed with the energy of a job well done. "Isabella," Victoria said, approaching the chef who was supervising the dishwashing operation, "I don't think you realize what you've accomplished tonight." Isabella looked up from a stack of serving plates she was organizing. "We served dinner to 300 people. It went well." "No," Victoria said, shaking her head. "You did far more than that. You created an experience that these people will remember for the rest of their lives. I've been in this business for 23 years, and I've never seen guests respond to a meal the way they did tonight." She pulled out her phone and showed Isabella the flood of messages she'd been receiving throughout the evening. Inquiries about booking Isabella for future events, requests for her contact information, offers to invest in a restaurant if she was interested in opening one. "Mrs. Patterson wants to hire you for her daughter's engagement party next month. The Hendersons are asking about their anniversary celebration. And this one," she scrolled to a particular message, "is from Marcus Chen upstairs. Apparently the hotel's general manager wants to meet with you tomorrow about a potential position." Isabella stared at the phone, her expression shifting from disbelief to wonder. "All of this from one evening?" "From one evening where you showed 300 of Manhattan's most influential people what you're capable of," Victoria corrected. "Isabella, you're about to have more opportunities than you know what to do with." The kitchen cleanup continued around them, but Isabella seemed lost in thought. Finally, she looked up at Victoria with an expression of cautious hope. "Miss Sterling, do you think any of this would have happened if I had just sent in a resume to these people? If I had approached them through normal channels?" Victoria considered the question seriously. "Honestly? Probably not. These people see hundreds of proposals and applications every month. They're bombarded with people wanting their business. But tonight, they experienced your work firsthand. They tasted your passion and your skill. That's something you can't communicate in a cover letter." Isabella nodded slowly. "I spent months trying to get people to see past my current situation, to recognize what I was capable of. I was so focused on fighting against my circumstances that I forgot the most important thing. The work speaks for itself. Tonight, Your work spoke volumes, Victoria agreed, and everyone was listening. The sound of footsteps on the stairs interrupted their conversation. Sophia appeared in the kitchen doorway, having changed out of her wedding dress into a more casual outfit, though still elegant enough for the after-party that would continue upstairs. "Isabella," she said, walking directly to the chef, "I wanted to thank you again before Alexander and I leave for our honeymoon. What you did today was magical." She handed Isabella an envelope. "This is a small token of our gratitude, but more importantly, I want you to know that you've given us the perfect beginning to our marriage. Every time we have an anniversary dinner, we'll remember this evening and how you made it possible." Isabella accepted the envelope with obvious emotion. "Mrs. Montgomery, seeing your happiness tonight was all the thanks I needed. I wish you and your husband every joy." After Sophia left, Isabella opened the envelope and stared at its contents in shock. Victoria caught a glimpse of what appeared to be a very generous check, along with a handwritten note. "What does it say?" Victoria asked. Isabella read aloud, her voice slightly unsteady. "Dear Isabella, you turned our potential disaster into our greatest blessing. Use this to chase your dreams, whatever they may be. We'll be your first customers wherever you land. With gratitude and admiration, Sophia and Alexander Montgomery." She looked up at Victoria, tears threatening to spill over. "I can't accept this. It's too much." "You can and you will," Victoria said firmly. "You earned every penny of that through your skill, your dedication, and your willingness to take an enormous risk to help people you barely knew." As the cleanup operation wound down and the temporary kitchen crew began to disperse, Isabella found herself alone with Victoria and Marcus, who had come downstairs to check on the situation. "Isabella," Marcus said, "I owe you an apology. I've worked with you for 6 months, and I never took the time to really get to know you or understand your background. I'm sorry for that." She smiled at him. "You had no reason to assume I was anything other than what I appeared to be. I chose not to share my background because I needed the job, and I was afraid that being overqualified might work against me." "Well," Marcus said, "that's definitely not going to be a problem anymore. The general manager wants to meet with you first thing Monday morning. There's talk of reopening the hotel's catering operation with you as executive chef." Isabella's eyes widened. "Really? Really?" "After tonight's performance, the hotel would be crazy not to want you on their team. You've proven that this kitchen can produce world-class results." Victoria watched this exchange with deep satisfaction. Not only had they averted disaster, but they had uncovered a genuine talent who was finally going to get the recognition she deserved. It was the kind of story that reminded her why she loved her work, why she believed in the power of bringing people together around beautiful experiences. As they finally made their way back upstairs, the ballroom was beginning to empty. The after-party would continue in a smaller venue, but the formal dinner portion of the evening was complete. Victoria looked around at the elegant space, still decorated with flowers and candlelight, and marveled at how different the scene was from the chaos of 6 hours earlier. "Miss Sterling," Isabella said as they reached the main floor, "I want you to know that today changed my life, not just because of the opportunities that might come from it, but because you reminded me of something I had started to forget." "What's that?" "That being seen and being valued are not the same thing," Isabella said thoughtfully. "I spent so much energy trying to be seen, trying to get people to notice my qualifications and my potential. But you valued me before you even knew who I was. You were willing to trust me based on nothing more than my willingness to help and my confidence in my abilities." Victoria felt a lump form in her throat. "Isabella, you saved my career tonight. My reputation, my business, everything I've worked for over the past 2 decades. I should be thanking you." "We saved each other," Isabella corrected with a smile. "You gave me a chance, and I gave you a solution. But more than that, we proved that sometimes the most important partnerships happen when you least expect them." Over the following weeks, Victoria watched Isabella's transformation with amazement and pride. The hotel's general manager did indeed offer her the position of executive chef, with a salary that reflected her true value and the authority to rebuild their catering operation from the ground up. The inquiries from wedding guests turned into actual bookings. Isabella found herself busier than she had ever been, but it was the kind of busy that came from doing work she loved at the level she had always aspired to reach. Victoria's own business experienced a boost as well. Word of how she had handled the Blackwood wedding crisis spread through Manhattan's social circles, and her reputation for grace under pressure and innovative problem-solving brought in new clients who wanted someone who could handle any situation. 3 months after the wedding, Victoria received an invitation to attend the grand reopening of the Grand Meridian's catering operation. The event was being held in the same ballroom where the Blackwood wedding had taken place, but this time Isabella was being celebrated as the featured chef rather than the hidden savior. The guest list for the reopening included many of the same people who had attended the wedding, and Victoria watched with satisfaction as they greeted Isabella with the respect and admiration she deserved. Food industry professionals, hotel executives, and potential clients all wanted to meet the chef who had become the talk of Manhattan's culinary scene. Isabella had designed a tasting menu for the evening that showcased her range and creativity, and each dish was met with enthusiastic approval. Victoria found herself standing near the same spot where she had panicked just months earlier, marveling at how completely the situation had been transformed. "Miss Sterling," a familiar voice said behind her. She turned to see Margaret Blackwood approaching, elegant as always in a designer cocktail dress. "Mrs. Blackwood, how lovely to see you," Victoria replied. "Are you enjoying the evening?" "Immensely," Margaret replied, "but I wanted to speak with you about something. I've been watching Isabella's career since the wedding, and I'm impressed by how she's handled her success. She's remained gracious and professional despite suddenly being in very high demand." Victoria nodded. "She's a remarkable person. Her talent speaks for itself, but her character is what makes her truly special." "Indeed," Margaret agreed. "Which is why I wanted to let you know that the Blackwood Foundation is considering establishing a scholarship program for culinary students who show exceptional promise but face financial barriers to education. We'd like Isabella to help us design the program and serve on the selection committee." Victoria felt a surge of emotion at this news. The idea that Isabella's story might help other talented individuals overcome their own obstacles was deeply moving. "I think she would be honored to be involved in something like that," Victoria said. "I hope so," Margaret replied. "Sophia's wedding taught me something important about recognizing talent in unexpected places. I don't want other people with Isabella's abilities to have to wait tables or clean rooms while they try to get their careers off the ground." As the evening progressed, Victoria found herself in conversation with Isabella near the kitchen entrance where their partnership had first begun. "Can you believe this is the same place where I was panicking about ruined weddings just 3 months ago?" Victoria asked. Isabella laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "Sometimes I have to pinch myself to make sure this is all real. 6 months ago, I was cleaning hotel rooms and wondering if I'd ever get back to the kind of work I trained for. Now I'm running my own kitchen and getting calls from restaurants that want to recruit me. Any regrets about taking the housekeeping job?" Victoria asked. Isabella considered the question seriously. "You know, I don't think so. Obviously, it wasn't where I wanted to be long-term, but it taught me something important about humility and about not defining my worth based on other people's perceptions of my job title." She gestured around the bustling ballroom. "If I hadn't been cleaning rooms that day, if I hadn't overheard your planning meetings, if I hadn't been in exactly the right place at exactly the right time, none of this would have happened." Sometimes the path to where you want to be leads through places you never expected to go. Victoria nodded, thinking about her own journey and the unexpected turns that had led to some of her greatest successes. Life has a way of preparing us for opportunities we don't even know are coming. "Exactly," Isabella agreed. "And sometimes the most important skill is being ready to recognize those opportunities when they present themselves." As the reopening event wound down and guests began to leave, Victoria reflected on the extraordinary chain of events that had begun with a catering disaster and evolved into a story of triumph that had changed multiple lives. Isabella had found her way back to the career she loved, but more than that, she had discovered her own resilience and learned to trust in her abilities even when circumstances seemed to work against her. Victoria had not only saved her reputation, but had gained a deeper understanding of what it meant to truly see and value the people around her. The Blackwood wedding had become legendary in Manhattan social circles, not just for the elegant setting or the distinguished guest list, but for the story of the housekeeper who stepped forward to save the day and revealed herself to be a culinary artist of extraordinary talent. But perhaps the most important legacy of that evening was the reminder it provided about the power of taking chances on people, about looking beyond surface appearances to recognize potential, and about the magic that can happen when someone is finally given the opportunity to show what they're truly capable of accomplishing. Months later, when Victoria would tell the story to other event planners facing their own crises, she would always emphasize the same key point. The solution to your biggest problem might be standing right in front of you, waiting for someone to notice them and give them a chance to shine. Isabella's success had opened doors not just for herself, but for other talented individuals who had been overlooked or undervalued. The scholarship program Margaret Blackwood had proposed became a reality, helping dozens of culinary students pursue their dreams without the financial barriers that might otherwise have held them back. The Grand Meridian's catering operation became one of the most sought-after services in the city, with Isabella at the helm of a kitchen that consistently produced extraordinary results. Her story inspired other hotels and restaurants to look more carefully at their own staff, to consider whether they might be overlooking talent in unexpected places. Victoria's business continued to thrive, but she found that her approach to problem-solving had fundamentally changed. Where once she might have immediately reached for her contact list of established vendors and service providers, she now made it a point to consider whether the solution might already be present in some unexpected form. She began mentoring young event planners, sharing Isabella's story as an example of how crisis could become opportunity, how the worst moments in a career could become the foundation for the greatest successes. The lesson she emphasized most strongly was the importance of remaining open to possibilities, even when they came from the most unlikely sources. The friendship between Victoria and Isabella deepened over time, built on mutual respect and the shared experience of having navigated an impossible situation together. They often laughed about that frantic afternoon in the hotel kitchen, but they never forgot the lessons it had taught them about trust, courage, and the power of believing in each other. Years later, when food industry publications would write about Isabella's rise to prominence, they would inevitably mention the Blackwood wedding as the turning point in her career. But those who knew the full story understood that the real turning point had come in the moment when Victoria Sterling chose to listen to a housekeeper's offer to help, when she decided to trust in someone's potential rather than being limited by their current circumstances. The wedding that had almost been ruined became instead a celebration of second chances, hidden talents, and the beautiful things that could happen when people were willing to see beyond appearances, to recognize the extraordinary potential that existed in ordinary moments. Isabella's journey from housekeeper to executive chef became a symbol of hope for anyone who had ever felt overlooked or undervalued, proof that with skill, determination, and the right opportunity, it was possible to transform not just your own life, but the lives of everyone around you. And Victoria's willingness to take a chance on an unknown chef became a reminder that sometimes the most important leadership decision is knowing when to step back and let someone else's talents shine, trusting that their success would become your success, and that together you could accomplish things that neither could achieve alone. The story of the wedding that was saved by a cleaning lady became more than just an anecdote about crisis management or career transformation. It became a testament to the power of human potential, the importance of giving people chances to prove themselves, and the beautiful reality that sometimes the most extraordinary solutions come from the most unexpected places. In the end, what had started as a potential disaster became a masterpiece, not just of culinary artistry, but of human connection, mutual support, and the kind of collaborative success that reminded everyone involved why they had chosen their professions in the first place. The wedding was saved, careers were transformed, and lives were forever changed, all because two women chose to trust each other when trust seemed like the riskiest option available. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.